Have you ever stood in the middle of a crowd filled with people who have known you your entire life and still felt completely invisible? I have. What's strange is that strangers have often treated me with more kindness than my own family ever did. If someone had told me that one ordinary family barbecue would completely change my life, I would have laughed. But that afternoon, one cruel sentence, one silent betrayal, and one unexpected visitor changed everything. My name is Victoria Thompson, and this is the story of how the people I loved most underestimated me, until the truth forced them to see me in a completely different light. Growing up, my parents always taught my brother Daniel and me one simple lesson: respect is something you give before you expect to receive it. My mother repeated those words almost every day. She believed kindness was a person's greatest achievement. For years, Daniel believed that too. He was more than my older brother. He was my best friend. When our father passed away, Daniel was the one who held my hand during the funeral. When Mom became sick years later, we promised each other we would always stay close. No matter what happens, he once said, "We're family first." Back then, I believed him. Life slowly moved us in different directions. Daniel built a successful construction company. He bought a beautiful home in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city. He married Melissa. At first, she seemed wonderful. Confident, elegant, charming, the kind of woman who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention. Everyone loved her, including me. During their first year of marriage, I tried my best to make her feel like part of our family. I invited her shopping, helped decorate their house, even stayed awake until 2 a.m. helping her prepare decorations for her birthday party. She smiled, she thanked me. Everything seemed normal, until little by little, something changed. It didn't happen overnight. It happened through tiny moments most people would never notice. Whenever people complimented me, Melissa somehow redirected the attention back to herself. If someone praised the dessert I brought, she would laugh. It's cute that Emma still enjoys cooking. I guess when you don't have a demanding career, you have more free time. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Mostly because I wasn't sure what else to do. Months later, when my promotion at work was announced, my aunt hugged me proudly. Before I could even answer her congratulations, Melissa smiled. Well, not everyone measures success the same way. Again, people laughed. Daniel said nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe that word became my excuse for almost everything. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she didn't realize how her words sounded. The truth was much simpler. She knew exactly what she was doing. And somehow, she always did it where everyone else could hear. Unlike Daniel and Melissa, my life looked incredibly ordinary. I lived in a modest apartment. I drove a 12-year-old sedan that squeaked every time I started it. My clothes weren't designer brands. Most weekends, I volunteered at community outreach programs instead of attending expensive social events. People assumed my life wasn't successful. I rarely corrected them. Because success had never been about money to me. There were parts of my life I intentionally kept private. Not because I was ashamed. Because I enjoyed being treated like an ordinary person. Titles disappear. Money comes and goes. Character stays. Unfortunately, not everyone believes that. Especially Melissa. She judged people within seconds. Their clothes, their cars, their watches, their homes. Everything became a competition. Sometimes I wondered if she even realized she was doing it. Other times. I knew she did about 2 weeks before Daniel's annual family barbecue. My cousin Olivia called me. "You're coming this year, right?" "I'll try." "No," she laughed. "You're definitely coming, I'll be there." Good, then she hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this." "What?" "Melissa has been planning this barbecue for weeks. Okay? She's invited some business partners, a few local politicians, people from the country club." "So?" Olivia sighed. "I just don't want her making you uncomfortable again." I forced a laugh. I can handle Melissa. Could I? Honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. Every family gathering seemed to follow the same pattern. Melissa made a joke. Everyone laughed. Daniel stayed quiet. And I drove home wondering why I kept coming back. Still, family mattered. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The morning of the barbecue arrived bright and warm. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. Because I wanted to avoid giving Melissa another reason to criticize me. I finally chose a simple navy blue summer dress. Comfortable, classic, nothing flashy. I looked in the mirror. You'll be fine, I whispered. I wasn't trying to convince the mirror. I was trying to convince myself. On the drive over, I stopped at a local bakery and bought Daniel's favorite pecan pie. Our mother used to bake one every summer. It felt like bringing a small piece of our childhood back with me. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed luxury cars lining both sides of the street. Mercedes, BMWs, a sleek black Range Rover. I quietly parked my old sedan near the end of the block where it would attract the least attention. Old habit. I grabbed the pie, took a deep breath, and walked toward the backyard. The smell of grilled food filled the air. Children laughed as they chased each other across the lawn. Music played softly from outdoor speakers. For one brief moment, everything felt normal. Then Melissa noticed me. She smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel welcome. It was the kind that tells you a storm is coming. She walked toward me with perfectly practiced confidence. "Emma," she said loudly. "So glad you could make it." Before I could answer, her eyes slowly traveled from my shoes to my dress. She tilted her head. "Oh," she smiled again. "I honestly thought you'd dress a little nicer." Several conversations nearby suddenly grew quiet. People were listening. I felt every pair of eyes slowly turning toward me. I looked down at my dress for just a second, then back at her. "I thought this was a family barbecue." Melissa laughed. "Oh, it is." She stepped closer. I just forgot that not everyone has the same standards. A few uncomfortable chuckles broke the silence. I searched the crowd. My eyes found Daniel. He had heard every word. For one hopeful second, I waited for my brother to say something. Anything. Instead, he lowered his eyes, picked up a pair of barbecue tongs, and turned away. In that moment, the words hurt. But his silence hurt even more. I stood there for a moment, forcing myself to smile. I had learned years ago that people become uncomfortable when they see someone refuse to react. So instead of arguing with Melissa, I simply handed Daniel the pecan pie. "I brought your favorite." He looked at the pie, then at me. For a brief second, I saw the same older brother who used to protect me when we were kids. "Thanks, Em," he said quietly. Before he could say anything else, Melissa wrapped her arm around him. "Oh, Daniel, don't leave our guests waiting." She gently pulled him away. He didn't resist. He didn't even look back. I stood there holding an empty pie dish, feeling more alone than I had in years. I decided to stay. Not because I wanted to, because leaving immediately would have made everyone think Melissa had won. So I walked toward the drink table, greeted a few relatives, and tried to enjoy the afternoon. For a little while, things were peaceful. My cousin Olivia came over with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to apologize. I know, but someone should." She squeezed my hand before walking away. That small act of kindness meant more than she probably realized. About 30 minutes later, everyone gathered around the large outdoor tables for lunch. Melissa had arranged everything perfectly. Elegant decorations, fresh flowers, custom place cards. She loved appearances. Every detail had to impress. As everyone found their seats, I noticed something strange. There wasn't a name card for me. I looked around. Every chair was assigned. Except mine, Melissa noticed immediately. She gave an innocent smile. "Oh no, I must have forgotten to make one." Her voice was sweet, almost believable. Then she looked around dramatically. I guess you can sit at the kids' table." Several people looked uncomfortable. The children's table was nearly 20 feet away, filled with kids under 10 years old. I was 34. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. One of Daniel's business partners frowned. "Is she serious?" Nobody answered. Melissa laughed. "Emma doesn't mind. She's always been simple." Simple, that word landed harder than I expected. Not poor. Not unsuccessful. Simple, as though my life had somehow failed because it wasn't expensive enough. I quietly picked up my plate. "It's okay. I'll sit wherever there's space." Just before I reached the children's table, an elderly woman touched my arm. It was Mrs. Carter. She had been my parents' neighbor for nearly 20 years. "I saved you a seat beside me." Her gentle smile nearly brought tears to my eyes. I thanked her and sat down. Melissa looked disappointed. She had wanted everyone to see me sitting with the children. Instead, I spent lunch beside the kindest person in the yard. Mrs. Carter leaned closer. "You know, your mother would be so proud of you." I swallowed hard. I miss her every day, I know. She always said you had the strongest heart in the family. For the first time that afternoon, someone saw me. Not my clothes, not my old car. Me, across the table, I noticed Melissa watching us. She wasn't happy. She wanted attention. Instead, people were beginning to notice how uncomfortable her behavior made everyone else. She quickly changed tactics. Halfway through lunch, she stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. I just want to thank everyone for coming. People applauded politely. She continued, This year has been amazing. Our business is growing. Our investments are doing well. We're truly blessed. She paused dramatically. I hope everyone here is doing as well. Then, her eyes landed on me. Although, she smiled. Success looks different for everyone. The silence returned. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. One of Daniel's employees looked down at his plate. Another guest cleared his throat awkwardly. Even some of Melissa's friends looked embarrassed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Still, nothing, no defense, no objection. Nothing. After lunch, I volunteered to help clean the tables. Melissa stepped beside me. Oh, don't worry. We've hired staff. I nodded. Okay, she folded her arms. I suppose volunteering is what you're best at. I looked at her. What does that mean? She smiled. It means some people build successful lives, and others spend their lives helping successful people. For a second, the words stole my breath. Not because they were true, because they revealed exactly how she measured human worth. Money, status, recognition, nothing else mattered. I quietly picked up a stack of empty plates. I hope someday you discover there's another way to measure success. She laughed. I already have. My bank account. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. My parents hadn't raised me to fight insults with insults. Still, the pain was becoming harder to hide. I found a quiet corner of the backyard beneath an old oak tree. The same tree Daniel and I used to climb when we were children. I closed my eyes. For just a minute, I allowed myself to cry. Not loud, not dramatically, just enough to let the pressure escape. I wasn't crying because Melissa hated me. I was crying because my brother kept allowing it. That was the betrayal I couldn't understand. A voice interrupted my thoughts. You okay? It was Daniel. Finally, he stood a few feet away, looking guilty. I'm fine. No, you're not. I looked at him. Then why didn't you say anything? He sighed. You know how Melissa is. I stared at him in disbelief. No, I know how you are. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you watched your wife humiliate your own sister. And you chose silence. It's complicated. No, it isn't. He rubbed the back of his neck. I just didn't want to create a scene. I couldn't help but laugh. A sad, exhausted laugh. Daniel, she created the scene. You just decided it was easier to let me carry it. Those words hit him harder than I expected. For the first time all day, he had no answer. I walked away before he could respond. Some conversations aren't meant to continue. Some silences say everything. I reached my old sedan and unlocked the driver's door. I couldn't stay another minute. As I placed my hand on the handle, I heard something unusual. The distant rumble of an approaching military vehicle. At first, no one paid attention. But within seconds, the vehicle slowed and stopped directly in front of Daniel's house. Conversations across the backyard faded. Children stopped running. Guests turned toward the street. A uniformed driver stepped out first. Then, the rear door opened. An older man in a decorated military uniform emerged with calm confidence. Rows of ribbons covered his chest. Every step carried quiet authority. He looked around the yard, scanning the faces one by one. His eyes passed over Daniel, over Melissa, over every guest, until they stopped on me. To my complete surprise, his face broke into a warm smile. He adjusted his cap, stood perfectly straight, and began walking directly toward me. No hesitation, no doubt. Every person at the barbecue instinctively stepped aside to let him pass. Melissa looked confused. Daniel looked stunned. I felt my heartbeat quicken, because I recognized him instantly. It had been almost 8 years, but I knew exactly who he was. And deep inside, I realized that the secret I had protected for so many years was only seconds away from changing everything. The entire backyard fell silent. Even the music seemed quieter. The decorated military officer walked past every guest without saying a word. His polished shoes echoed across the stone pathway as dozens of confused eyes followed him. Melissa straightened her posture, clearly assuming he was one of Daniel's important business contacts. She stepped forward with a polished smile. Good afternoon. Welcome to our home. The officer acknowledged her with a polite nod, but he didn't stop. Instead, he continued walking. Toward me. I could hear my own heartbeat. 8 years. It had been 8 long years since I had last seen him in person. When he finally reached me, he smiled warmly. Emma, it's been far too long. I smiled back. It certainly has, Colonel Harris. Without another word, he stood perfectly straight. Then, in front of everyone, he raised his hand in a crisp military salute. The backyard froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Melissa's confident smile slowly disappeared. Daniel stared at us as though he had forgotten how to breathe. The colonel lowered his hand and said something I never expected him to repeat after all these years. It is an honor to see you again, General. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. General? Did he just call her General? Emma? Melissa laughed nervously. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Colonel Harris looked at her calmly. There hasn't. He turned back to me. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. I've been traveling, I replied. I figured. He smiled. You've always been difficult to track down. Several people laughed softly. Not at me. With me. For the first time all afternoon, the laughter didn't hurt. Daniel finally walked over. Emma, what is he talking about? I looked at my brother, the same brother who had watched me suffer for hours without saying a single word. There was confusion in his eyes. But there was also something else. Regret. I never told anyone, I said quietly. You never asked. Melissa folded her arms. Asked what? I took a slow breath. Years of memories flooded back. I've spent the last 15 years working in international humanitarian crisis response. Blank faces surrounded me. I continued. When natural disasters, civil emergencies, or humanitarian crises happened overseas, my job was to coordinate rescue teams, government agencies, medical organizations, and military support. One of Daniel's business partners frowned. You mean disaster relief? Yes, but on a much larger scale. Colonel Harris smiled proudly. Much larger. He looked toward the guests. Most people here see an ordinary woman. I see someone who helped save thousands of lives. The silence became even heavier. Melissa spoke first. Thousands? Surely that's an exaggeration. Colonel Harris's expression remained calm. No, it isn't. He looked at me again. Do you remember the coastal floods? I nodded. I'll never forget them. Suddenly, the smell of barbecue disappeared. My mind returned to another place. Another time. I remembered endless rain. Collapsed bridges. Children crying in temporary shelters. Parents desperately searching for missing family members. For 43 straight hours. None of us slept. Every decision mattered. Every minute counted. One wrong choice could cost lives. Colonel Harris had commanded military logistics. I had coordinated civilian rescue operations. Different roles. One mission. Save as many people as possible. He looked back at everyone gathered in Daniel's backyard. Emma wasn't interested in awards. She wasn't interested in publicity. She only cared about getting people home alive. I lowered my eyes. Those years had changed me, not because of the recognition, because of the suffering I had witnessed. After seeing entire communities lose everything, expensive cars no longer impressed me. Designer clothes stopped mattering. Life became measured differently. In kindness, in courage, in compassion. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. If all of this is true, why would you hide it? I smiled gently. Because it wasn't something to hide. It was simply my job. But people would respect you. I looked directly into her eyes. The people worth keeping in my life respected me before they knew. Her face turned pale. For the first time, she understood exactly what I meant. Colonel Harris reached inside a leather folder. I actually came because of this. He handed me a cream-colored envelope with a gold seal. I opened it carefully. Inside was an official invitation. The National Leadership Foundation. Annual Humanitarian Excellence Ceremony. Guest of honor. I stared at the page in disbelief. I thought they had forgotten about me. Colonel Harris smiled. They never did. You declined the last 3 invitations. I wasn't comfortable with public recognition. I know. That's why this year, you don't have a choice. A few guests laughed. I smiled too. Then Colonel Harris did something that completely changed the atmosphere. He turned toward Daniel. "You must be proud." Daniel looked embarrassed. I honestly didn't know." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "That's unfortunate." His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. "You spent years beside someone extraordinary and never thought to ask about her life." Daniel lowered his head. There was no defense, no excuse, only silence. Mrs. Carter quietly wiped tears from her eyes. "I always knew your mother raised an exceptional daughter." Those words touched me more deeply than any medal ever could, because they reminded me of why I had chosen this life in the first place. My parents never cared about titles. They cared about people. Everything I had accomplished began with lessons learned around our small family dinner table. Colonel Harris glanced at his watch. "I have another meeting across town." He looked at me one last time. "I'll see you at the ceremony. I'll be there." He smiled. "I knew you would." Then he saluted once more, not because I outranked him, but because over the years, General had become his nickname for me, a reminder of the calm leadership I showed during impossible situations. As he walked back toward the military vehicle, every guest instinctively stepped aside again. The vehicle disappeared down the street, but the silence it left behind was louder than anything Melissa had said all afternoon. Nobody returned to their conversations. Nobody cared about the barbecue anymore. Every eye in the backyard was now fixed on me. And I realized something. The truth had finally come out. But what none of them knew was that my greatest test wasn't earning their respect. It was deciding whether they deserved mine. For several long seconds after Colonel Harris drove away, no one spoke. The cheerful music still played softly through the outdoor speakers. Children continued laughing in the distance, and the smell of barbecue still drifted through the backyard. But everything felt different. It was as if someone had quietly pulled back a curtain, revealing a truth no one had expected. Every guest who had watched Melissa mock me just minutes earlier now avoided looking in her direction, and for the first time since I arrived, I wasn't the one feeling uncomfortable. Melissa was. She forced a smile and clapped her hands together. "Well, everyone, let's not let this ruin the party." Her voice sounded cheerful, too cheerful. No one responded. The conversations that usually filled the backyard never returned. People weren't interested in the food anymore. They were thinking about what they had just witnessed. Not because a decorated colonel had called me general, but because they had watched someone spend an entire afternoon humiliating a woman they had never truly known. I quietly picked up my purse. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply tired. As I walked toward the driveway, I heard footsteps behind me. "Emma." It was Daniel. I stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. He stood a few feet behind me, his hands buried in his pockets, just like he used to do whenever he felt guilty as a child. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "You do." Tears filled his eyes. "I should have said something. Yes, I should have stopped her the first time. Yes, I was afraid we'd argue in front of everyone." I gave him a sad smile. "And instead, you let me be the one who suffered in front of everyone." He lowered his head. There was nothing he could say. Some mistakes can't be explained away. They can only be acknowledged. "I failed you," he whispered. The words carried more weight than any excuse ever could. "You did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me again. "When did we become strangers?" His question broke my heart. "We became strangers," I answered softly, "the day keeping peace became more important to you than protecting your sister." He covered his face with one hand. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it with words, you fix it with choices." I was about to leave when someone called my name again. This time, it was Melissa. She walked toward me slowly. Gone was the confident woman who had spent the afternoon making jokes at my expense. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure of herself. "I'd like to talk." I nodded. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath. "I was wrong." I remained silent. "I judged you." Still, I said nothing. "I assumed that because you didn't talk about money, you didn't have anything to be proud of." Her voice shook. "I thought success meant expensive cars, designer clothes, large houses." She looked around at the guests who were quietly watching from a distance. "I wanted everyone to admire me." She swallowed hard, so I made someone else look small. I looked into her eyes. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance. I saw embarrassment. Real embarrassment. Not because people had discovered my past. Because she had finally seen herself. Emma, I'm truly sorry. I believe she meant it. But forgiveness isn't something that appears the moment someone apologizes. Trust is rebuilt one action at a time. I appreciate your apology, I said gently. But I need time. She nodded. I understand. There was no argument, no excuses, only acceptance. That told me more than her words ever could. Over the next few weeks, life became strangely quiet. No dramatic phone calls, no family arguments, just silence. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel began showing up at my apartment every Sunday morning. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes breakfast. Sometimes he simply sat with me on the balcony. We talked about Mom, about Dad, about childhood memories, about all the years we had slowly allowed distance to grow between us. One Sunday he looked at me and said, I kept thinking that avoiding conflict made me a good husband. He sighed, but I forgot it also made me a terrible brother. I smiled sadly. The important part is that you finally understand the difference. He nodded. I won't make that mistake again. For the first time in years, I believed him. A month later, I attended the National Leadership Foundation's Humanitarian Excellence Ceremony. Unlike the barbecue, I wore the same simple style I had always loved. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, just quiet confidence. Colonel Harris greeted me with a warm smile. It's good to see you. It's good to be here. As we walked inside, he leaned closer. You know, you taught a lot of young officers that leadership has nothing to do with rank. It has everything to do with responsibility. I smiled. I learned that from my parents. When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage. A large screen behind me displayed photographs from humanitarian missions around the world. Flood relief, emergency shelters, medical camps, families reunited after disasters, children smiling despite unimaginable loss. The audience stood in applause. I looked across the room and noticed something that surprised me. Daniel was there. So was Melissa. Neither of them had come because of obligation. They had bought tickets after learning the event was open to the public. Melissa quietly wiped away tears as the narrator described years of service that I had never spoken about. When the applause finally settled, I stepped to the microphone. I hadn't prepared a speech. I simply spoke from my heart. I've been called many titles over the years: advisor, coordinator, leader, and today, even guest of honor. I smiled softly. But the title I'm proudest of is simply being someone my parents would recognize. The room became completely silent. I've learned something important. The strongest people in the world rarely need to announce their strength. Real character appears when nobody is watching. And kindness is still the greatest form of leadership. The audience rose to its feet once again. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous. I almost quit my volunteer program last month. She smiled through tears. But after hearing your story, I've decided to stay. Thank you. In that moment, I realized something. That single conversation meant more than every award sitting inside the building. If my story inspired even one person to keep helping others, then every difficult day had been worth it. Several months passed. Family gatherings slowly returned, but they felt different now. Melissa no longer competed for attention. She listened more than she spoke. She even began volunteering once a month at the same community center where I worked. Not because I asked her to, because she wanted to understand why service had mattered so much to me. One afternoon, she quietly admitted, I spent years trying to impress people who barely remembered my name. She looked around the busy shelter where volunteers were serving meals. But these families, they'll remember kindness forever. I smiled. I think you've finally discovered what success really looks like, looking back now. People often ask me if the Colonel changed my life that day. The truth is, he didn't. He simply revealed the life I had already been living. The real change happened inside the people who had judged me without knowing my story, including my own family. If I've learned one lesson through all of this, it's this. Never measure someone's worth by the car they drive, the clothes they wear, or the title they carry. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet live quiet lives, expecting nothing in return except the chance to make someone else's day a little better. And as for revenge, I discovered that the sweetest form of justice isn't watching someone fall. It's continuing to rise with grace until the truth speaks louder than every insult ever could.